Hi everyone, Olly here, and this is the 18th edition of Olly Ranks, where I'll be ranking the 18th season of Classic Doctor Who. So, season 18 is basically Tom Baker's 7th and final season as the 4th Doctor, and this season pretty much saw one of the biggest changes ever in Doctor Who, and that comes with the new producer, John Nathan Turner, who remains the producer of Classic Who until the very end of the show in 1989. And he pretty much changed every single aspect of Doctor Who in this season, and he pretty much stripped the overt silliness that was very dominant in the Graham Williams era, and made Doctor Who more serious in nature and featured elements that was rooted in real world science. With the assistance of new script editor Christopher H. Bidmead, and he also made the Fourth Doctor change his outfit, like instead of the usual light clothing here, the Doctor's wearing pretty much like a burgundy coat, a burgundy scarf, and with question marks on the colors of his outfit, which Tom Baker and the other Doctors didn't actually like. So one of the main themes of season 18 was the theme of entropy, defined as a degree of disorder and randomness in the system, which is often irreversible, and eventually leads into a decay and then death. And lots of stories actually featured empathy, entropy, and the examples are the fallout of the war the Argolians had from Arcee, which pretty much ruined Argolis. A character dying of old age, and that when the tachyonic machine claiming to fix aspects like old age, and the Doctor becoming aging like several hundred years because of the machine in the Leisure Hive. Tegela itself being disordered because of having how the planet was rotating, with causing some aspects to causing one to lose direction, and plus Tegela pretty much falling apart because the dodecahedron was stolen in Meglos. The vampire planet basically evolving backwards to the point of becoming uncivilized, as well as the three who were dying by aging to death because of the death of the great vampire in state of decay. The gateway pretty much falling apart and becoming unstable Warrior's Gate. The original Keeper getting all very old and is on the verge of death, which and Trochan caused experiencing free curves, and the time came for the new Keeper to be chosen, and the Doctor actually mentioned entropy in this story itself. And the Master reaching the end of his 12th regeneration, looking very worse for wear, and the Keeper of Trochan, and the Master creating the entropy wave to destroy the universe, which pretty much ended Trochan in Logopolis. So that's basically like the themes of the evidence of entropy in this season. So more on to season 18. Tom Baker returns as the Fourth Doctor for the final time, and before handing over the TARDIS to Peter Davison, Lala Ward returns as Romana too, and she leaves in Warriors Gate along with K9, who John Leeson returns to voice again, which is a very cruel twist of fate because he's brought back just to leave in a few stories later, and K9 often pretty much is put through the ringer by in this season until, with the exception of State of Decay. And we also get new companions in this season. First off, we had Madrick, a teenage mathematical prodigy from the planet Alzarius, which is located in E-Space, and he's played by Matthew Waterhouse, and he stows her in the TARDIS in full circle. Second, we had Nissa, a young girl from the planet Trochan, she actually makes her first appearance in the Keeper of Trochan, but she doesn't actually join the TARDIS team in Logopolis, and she is played by Sarah Sutton. And finally, we have Tikan Javanka, a gobby Australian air stewardess played by Janet Fielding, and she joins in Logopolis as well. So if you're not familiar with Olly Ranks, I'll be ranking all the stories in this season from worst to best, and I'll explain my reasons for the rankings. In 7th place is The Leisure Hive. This story is the story that pretty much kicked off John Nathan Turner's 9-year tenure as producer, and the first story under his tenure was not good at all, in my opinion. And I think a lot of other Whovians agree as well. It wasn't a poor story, but it had a decent plot, but the executions were pretty much ruined the story because John Nathan Turner, I think the original script, which was done by David Fisher, was pretty much a parody of gangster movies, and it was said to have been quite funny as well, but then John Nathan Turner decided to get rid of the vast majority of the humor of the story, and what was left was pretty much what was there, and it did cause the story to be a bit uneven because of the timings, and that obviously led to the 2 minute pan across Brighton Beach in the beginning of the story, which was just man, and it was quite lifeless. I thought it was quite lifeless as well, and it turned out to be very dull. And And as I said before, John Nathan Turner and the script editor for this season, Christopher H. Bidmead, wanted to make this Doctor Who more serious and have more real world hard science elements, and which is a good idea, but at least if you're including something as real as like tachyonics, which is the story was, at least try and explain it, because they pretty much threw in tachyonics in there and just went with it, and they didn't even care to explain like what was tachyonics and stuff like that. The acting was alright. Tom Baker was very good. He does well to work in a serious atmosphere. And the Doctor actually gets older because of the tachyonic machine, aging him 1,000 years, and he pretty much remains that way for the rest of the story until he goes back to the tachyonic machine to like clone himself to replace Pangol's army of clones. I mean, he does actually do some things whilst he's old. But remember some of the other heavy lifting. Lala Ward is good here, but I think she does tend to moan, especially in the beginning of the story. She was pretty much moaning about K9, about holidays and stuff like that. And the villain, Pangol, was too over the top. I didn't understand his motives at all, and I give that story a 4 out of 10. In 6th place is Meglos. I like this story, but as I said before, I didn't think the writers knew what they wanted this story to be. I noticed there were some elements that in this story that the writers wanted it to be comedic, but obviously they couldn't because of John Nathan Turner and Bidmead, and it's a shame really, because I think this story would have been a perfect fit for the Graham Williams era, or even the Hinchcliffe era. They could have easily made the planet together more gothic, so to speak. Tom Baker is great in the story. He actually plays both the Doctor and Meglos, and I can tell that Baker had a blast playing Meglos, and it gave him some freedom to show off his range, and it pretty much discreetly displays the theme of entropy in the story. Meglos himself was a good villain. We actually see Jacqueline Hill returning as in this story, but she's not as Barbara. She returns as someone called Lexa. She's quite standoffish towards the Doctor, but then she thought the Doctor stole the dodecahedron, even though the Doctor did technically steal the dodecahedron, but it was Meglos pretending to be the Doctor. But the side cast was alright. Lala Ward was quite good, and she had some good moments herself, and I gave Meglos a 6 out of 10. In 5th place is Warriors Gate. A very good story, but overall I think Warriors Gate is a story that will probably need a few rewatches for one to understand and have a firm understanding of what was actually going on. The production of the story is very good, and I think it's definitely one of the main strengths of Warriors Gate, because the gateway is basically set in a white void in E space, which is technically like a gateway between E space and N space, and it was basically like the gateway was just basically like a white void, which was represented by the CSO, by recording the CSO room, which is very similar to what we saw in the Mind Robot all the way back in season 6. So the plot is basically the Doctor, Romana, and Adric trying to find a way out of E-space through the gateway, but obviously they have to like rescue these, like a time-sensitive race called the Tharos, who are pretty much being enslaved by Captain Rorvik and his crew, and Rorvik was using one of the Tharos named Birok to navigate them through the time winds. And the acting was quite good, even though the tensions between the main cast was very evident, because Tom Baker and Lala only made eye contact once, and I think this is because I think there was issues in their relationship, and Lala Ward and Matthew Walter do not like each other one bit, and it was quite evident. It was quite evident in the way she was like delivering her lines to him, and it was very cold and as if she was like telling him off or something, that just taking her anger out on him and something like that. But this was actually evident throughout the entire E-Space trilogy. In terms of Kanan and Romana's exits, I think it was quite hasty. It was written well, but I think it was hastily written because of Tom Baker and Lala Ward. I did like how the Doctor was saddened to see her go, and I liked how he pretty much said that she was the noblest Romana of them all. And he knew that the Romana would be great away from the Doctor, so I gave that story a 7 out of 10. In 4th place is State of Decay. A brilliant story that pretty much merges vampire lore with sci-fi elements. Random, yes, but it works wonders with the story. The atmosphere of State of Decay was very much akin to the Hammer horror movies, which was basically the baseline for most of the stories in the Philip Hinchcliffe era. I do admire how this story was quite gothic in terms of its themes, the location filming, and the sets as well, because the sets looked, especially the village, looked very grey, and the castle looked very much like very gothic in itself, which I very much admire. And I do like how the free there was explained how the free rule were just vampires, not necessarily aliens from an alien planet that pretty much resembled vampires who came to Earth like in the beginning of civilization, and that's how they pretty much merged into like vampire lore or stuff like that. They actually were vampires, and the great vampire was just one big ass vampire living under the rocket. Right, and that's how he pretty much turned the Free who rule into vampires, and the Free who were actually like human astronauts from 1998 traveling through space, but they were trapped in they ended up in E space and ended up on the vampire planet and they turned into vampires, but the great vampire. The acting was very good. I think Tom Baker's chemistry of Lala Ward was on show here, and it worked really well outside the comedic atmosphere because they were together for at least a good part of the story, and the part when they're in the jail cell, when the cell in the tower together, that they were like the doctor was like, "Romano, you are very wonderful," and she really appreciated that. Adric is alright here. He does a decent job, and this was actually Matthew Waterhouse's first story he filmed as Adric, and he did a good job here. He didn't do as much, but he was alright. There were some very scary moments, like how the one of the vampire bats decided to suck Romana's blood when the Free who were about to sacrifice her. And I thought the Free who were very good villains, so I gave that story an 8 out of 10. Our top 3 stories of season 18. In third place is Logopolis. And this is the story where Tom Baker hangs up his iconic coat and long scarf off and leaves the TARDIS forever. Logopolis is a brilliant story and is a very good send-off for the Fourth Doctor. And this is probably the most serious and vulnerable I've seen the Fourth Doctor ever. And it fits in with the dreary atmosphere and mood Logopolis has. And because it pretty much gives you the feel that the universe is coming to an end at the hand of the Master, and the Doctor doesn't know what to do exactly, but when he gets the idea of what he has to do, he pretty much knows it will come to the end of his life. And the universe was on the verge of being destroyed because of the Master and his entropy wave, and the Master obviously escaped from Trochan because of that. And obviously, we obviously had the White Figure, who was known as the Watcher, who was pretty much stalking the Doctor throughout the entire story, and he was able to get Nyssa out of Trochan and stuff like before Trochan got destroyed. I do think Logopolis is definitely one of Tom Baker's best performances as the Doctor, and his regeneration sequence is probably one of the best I've seen from Doctor Who. Matthew Waters is actually very good, and he does actually contribute to the plot instead of just moaning and bitching in the background like he does in the following season and his earlier stories. Anyways, I think Sarah Sutton does a great job, and her acting was quite good when she saw that Trochan had been destroyed by the entropy wave, and obviously Nyssa joined the TARDIS team because the Watcher brought her to Logopolis before the Master destroyed Trochan with the entropy wave. And we also have Tikhon Javanka. She had a very good, memorable debut. She accidentally entered the TARDIS when the car that her auntie was taken to the airport had broken down, and she came across the TARDIS, and she entered the Doctor's TARDIS, and that's how she pretty much found the Doctor and Adric en route to Logopolis. And she did a very good. When she found out that the Master had killed her auntie Vanessa, Janet Segan was like very upset, and I think now some very good acting by Janet Fielding. And finally, you have Anthony Ainsley and his first full story as the Master. He does a good job in this story as the Master, and I think he does his evil laugh a lot, which definitely does get a bit tedious shortly afterwards. But I did like how he pretty much captured the mentally unstable aspect of the Master, which actually does pretty much fail to get towards the end of the Colin Baker era, which is pretty much a shame because he was pretty much coming back every single time at the point of people just getting tired of it, and the writers pretty much just did whatever, really. So I give Logopolis an 8 out of 10. In second place is Full Circle, the story that pretty much kicks off the E-Space trilogy, and I think the story is very good, and it saves season 18 from being on complete failure after the first 2 stories were quite troublesome. Well, not necessarily, Meglos was troublesome as such, but I think it had its issues which I explained earlier. The plot was very good. It had elements such as evolution, from evolution, human, well, Alzarian morals and politics, and they all helped his story stand on its own 2 feet. The Marshmen were very good anti-villains because they didn't entirely show any harm to anyone, but they did kill a few people, but they were pretty much acting on their survival instincts, and they were very underdeveloped as well. But then they later started to develop to adapt to oxygen towards the end of the story, and they pretty much left the story unscathed, so to speak. The acting was very good. Tom Baker was very good in the season, and he as well as the other world are basically like adapting well to the seriousness of the season. Yes, there is some humor bit here and there, especially the part when one of the Marshmen just whacked Canaan's head off, which was quite funny, so to speak. And I liked, and one of my favorite scenes of the story was when Romana had found out that it was shortly after Romana found out that she had to go back to Gallifrey because she was only brought in to help the Doctor with the key to time, but now that quest was over, she pretty much had to go back to Gallifrey, and she was quite upset about it because she enjoyed her time with the Doctor, and it was quite evident in that scene. It was very well acted, and I also like Lala Ward's acting when she was under hypnosis by the how she was bitten by the crab spider. It pretty much turned her into like a marshman in the mental sense, and she was basically acting very like not grunty, but acting very like very much like one of them, and how she pretty much, well, not killing them as such, but she did like cause them harm, and she was pretty much the cause of the Marshman gaining access to the Starliner, which was quite cool. Matthew Waterhouse debuted as Adric, and I do feel like he was a bit irritable with the story, but I do like how he tried to save his brother Vash before he got killed by the Marshman, and I gave the story an 8 out of 10. And finally, in first place is The Keeper of Trochan, a story that lays the foundation for not just Logopolis, it pretty much lays the foundation for the Peter Davison era and, a larger extent, the remainder of Classic Who. The premise of Trochan is actually quite interesting because Trochan is basically a planet where evil cannot survive at all, and if any step of evil, even just the teentiest bit of evil, is pretty much sucked in by a statue named Malco, who was obviously responsible for which is the Masters was responsible for Malco being on that planet because I think he was trying to get the powers of the Keeper of Trochan to prolong his regeneration, to prolong his 12th regeneration, and despite Trochan being a planet of all things good and wholesome, the mood of this story was actually quite serious, and not as true as Logopolis, but it was very serious. Yes, and I actually like the acting. Tom Baker was very good, and as I said before, he definitely is adapting more to the seriousness of this. I really like Adric in the story because he actually does contribute to the plot, and I do think that he and Tom Baker do have a bit of an underrated chemistry, even though the two weren't too fond of each other back then, but they did work well together, and Adric did do some good stuff on his own, especially when he was with Nyssa. Now that Romana and Kane are no longer in the TARDIS, and the side casts are very good. I really liked Tremors. He was played by Anthony Ainsley before the Master hijacked his body and killed him and left Trochan, which was the ending of the story. But I think Anthony Ainsley really did the role of Tremas justice, and Tremas could have easily been another companion for the Doctor, so to speak, because I do like the relationship that he had with the Doctor, and to the larger extent Adric and his daughter Nyssa. And obviously the Master returned in the story, but obviously he's the same decayed Master from the Deadly Assassin, but I think there's a bit of a change in design because the Master in the Deadly Assassin looked quite scary and almost dead, and in this story the Master looks somewhat human, so to speak. But Jeffrey Beavers has played the Master of the story, and he's actually very good, and actually does capture the craziness of the Master very well. Nyssa, played by Sarah Sutton, makes her debut in the story, and she does a very good job helping Adric and the Doctor and her father here and there, and it was a very good story, and I give The Keeper of Trochan a 9 out of 10. So, my thoughts on Season 18. I personally wouldn't rate it off as a dry, humorless season as the Jonathan detractors say he did, but there are some elements of comedy, but obviously not as heavily comedic as the Graham Williams era. He does do a good job of producing season 18, but I think my main criticism with Jonathan Turner is that he never really settled on what his vision for Doctor Who was, because he pretty much was too experimental. Because in season 18, but it did work in some areas, but I think he was just like throwing things around which didn't really work overall. Because in season 18, he wanted to try and get rid of the humor that pretty much made Doctor Who too silly and early in the Graham Williams era. But then after that, people were complaining it was too serious and stuff like that. So he brought in a new script editor, Eric Sayred, who pretty much made Doctor Who like very violent, which definitely like turned people off from Doctor Who and just made things a lot worse. And it's a shame that Jonathan Turner doesn't really find what his vision for Doctor Who was until it was too late, because he actually did settle on what his vision for Doctor Who was in the McCoy era, and that was pretty much too late for the show. But the behind the scenes issues, such as Tom Baker and Lala Wall's tumultuous romance, which resulted in the two not appearing in too many scenes together, Matthew Waterhouse being a bit too big for his britches, and which caused him to be alienated from the rest of the cast and crew, and the other issues, I think when there's two people behind the scenes were fighting on Warriors Gate, which caused Christopher H. Bidmead to pretty much depart the season as the script editor. A lot of people would say that season 18 is Tom Baker's worst season. I think that dishonour does go to Decay to Time. As much as I love Decay to Time, I just think it doesn't really hold up in comparison to the other seasons. But I do think that season 18 is definitely Tom Baker's best season since season 14, and I give season 18 an A, or an A minus, so to speak. So my next set of reviews will be season 19, the first season of Peter Davison, starting off with Castrovalva. But before that, I'll be reviewing in Kanan and Company, Girl's Best Friend, which is Doctor Who's first ever spin-off, starring Elizabeth Sladen, who reprises her role as Sarah Jane Smith, and John Leeson reprising his role as K9. So thanks for watching this review. Please let me know, not necessarily review, this ranking video. Please let me know what you think of season 18 and what you think of Jonathan Turner, and I shall be seeing you later. Bye bye.